It has been a year since the Ukrainian-Russian war started. I have spent most of this year in Ukraine, sometimes in my condo in Ukraine but often on the road. Ukraine is a big country and so hotels are necessary. More than necessary, they are a pleasure, most of the time. I'd like to share my experiences and explain the perils and pleasures of travel in Ukraine, even during the war. This is of course not my voice. I am recovering from something and my voice is still a little hoarse and unreliable. Hence the computer-generated voiceover. My apologies. Hotel number 1 shown was in the mountains in the ski resort area. This was in March of 2022 when the Russian army was on the outskirts of Kyiv. Katie's apartment was near the smaller city airport in Kyiv and so shelling was very close to her apartment and she and her boyfriend asked me to get her to safety. The trip leaving Kyiv was a bit of a nightmare for Katie as there were tanks in the trees next to the road shooting at the Russians. There were holes in the pavement from incoming Russian artillery. The explosions were very close enough to smell the explosives occasionally. And the main road, E-40 was blocked and we got rerouted through city streets that were not designed for hundreds of cars trying to escape Kyiv. It was a relief to get to this hotel. It was a very difficult trip, but we made it. The best thing about this hotel was the lobby. There were big leather couches and tables for me to work at with a computer. There was Wi-Fi and there were people to talk to. The atmosphere was great. The room itself was unfortunately very small, barely room for the 2 twin beds. So we spent most of our time in the lobby and Katie also helped sort and prepare the donations for refugees. We included Princessa, my cat, who did not like the car but was happy in the hotel room and, after a few days, accepted Katie. The restaurant was attractive but the food was nothing special. We both had brought food and so we often ate in the room. Unfortunately I got very sick after 2 days, possibly COVID, so Katie had me sitting with my feet in hot water and breathing steam and after a week I was recovered. Then we visited a few local restaurants and discovered the local mountain soup. After 2 weeks, I took Katie to Chop where she crossed the border and then went to Switzerland where she is now. She is now a stewardess on a smaller Swiss airline. Then I drove back to Kyiv, but by then Kyiv was 90% surrounded by the Russians and it was another difficult trip for the princess and I. Let me describe this return trip a little better. Ukraine is a big country. Under ideal conditions, Chop to Kyiv is about 18 hours of driving at 60 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour. You follow Google Maps and it tells you where to go. Unfortunately, as you will soon discover in Ukraine, Google Maps lies. Google Maps does not know about construction, and so they send you onto roads where you are lucky to average walking speed, for 60 miles or 100 kilometers. And so, 8 hours into my trip I realized there was no possible way I was going to make it to Rovnia where there would be a lot of hotels. So I got onto booking.com and booked a room that I thought would be okay. It was okay, in fact it was great. Finding it was not. The house behind that metal gate and fence was the hotel. Actually it was not a hotel, it was a B&B. It was a private house owned by a single mother with a child who lived on the main floor. There was a kitchen shared by everyone. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms and a large shared bathroom. What there was not, was an address that Google Maps could find. So I stopped at a gas station on the main road and asked. A local was nice enough to ask me to follow and so off we went down a dirt road. It was already dark. Without asking there was no possible chance I could have found it. 0. But Ukrainians are helpful people and I have learned to ask for help when I need it. Honestly, Ukrainians are great people. So I got a very comfortable bed and a great breakfast at a very reasonable price. One of the other long-term guests was an IT worker and spoke good English. I loved it. Princessa, not so much. The little girl was allergic to cats, so Princessa spent the night in the car and since it was at the end of March there was still a little snow on the ground. So I only stayed 1 night. I expected another 8 hours of driving, but as I approached Kyiv on E-40, I got stopped by the military. Because of fighting the road was closed. They sent me south, and after some confusion I followed a line of vehicles southeast. After about 4 hours, I finally made it to Kyiv. Only to discover that the bridge to cross the river in Kyiv was closed. Again I asked, the soldiers sent me to the North Bridge. Which was 1 lane with tank traps all over it so I could only drive 5 miles per hour. Eventually I got to 10 minutes from my condo. But it was then 10:15 p.m. and curfew was 10. I got pulled over for curfew. 10 police in full body armor with assault rifles. But it helps to be an old American and after 15 minutes they understood the situation and that I was only 10 minutes from home and they let me go. So that was trip number 1, my first wartime adventure since Vietnam. I was home to my warm and comfortable condo. Princessa was out of the car which she hates with a passion. And if there were almost constant air raid sirens and occasional explosions near enough to set off car alarms and make the dogs bark, so what? If Kyiv was full of soldiers and it was faster to walk than to drive through all the military checkpoints, so what?